Is there any appetite in the House to simply adopt the Senate's tax bill?
I don't think so. We've got a few things we got to work out. They did some good heavy lifting. They're getting rid of the individual repeal, frees up about $320 billion. So that's a huge lift they did for us. But there's a few pieces in there. One of the most important, Reagan back in '82 delayed the tax rates, phased them in, and the expansion didn't come till '83. So '81, '82 was a recession. And so I think the most important thing that most economists will tell you is you got to lower the rates significantly and then enact them immediately, right? They're baked in the cake. You guys are just reading off the market highs. Whenever two senators down the hall sneeze, the market goes down. See, if you don't implement those rates right away, I think you're putting the economy in harm's way, as well as the markets, as well as wage rates for the people back home. So that's one of the things I think is worth fighting it out over. There's a few other pieces. There's a few promises that the American people are going to get sick of, trading huge budget votes on health care policy for tax votes. That's not smart policy. Up in the swamp can do better than that.
Congressman, the president flirted with the possibility of a 22% corporate tax rate over the weekend. Would that be acceptable to you if you needed to buy some more financial space?
Yeah, we've been hearing that number over and over and over. That's not optimal policy, right? You can exchange and horse trade on some of the exemptions and deductions and some of these moving pieces, but the rate's low. That's the number one driver. This is not a huge tax cut already, right? And so the president, I think more than anything else, wants to see economic growth, right? He wants to see a pop right away, and it's already coming, right? Samuelson, I think today in the Washington Post, said, beware of too much economic growth. He's scared we might overheat the economy. And boy, that would be great to see. And so my emphasis would be on getting the rates down and in place right away, and then moving other pieces around that need to be moved around. I wouldn't want to fiddle with a 22.
Now, what does the tax bill mean for entitlements like Medicare and Social Security? And I ask because a lot of people wonder whether the goal is to then start looking for savings in these entitlement programs.
No, there are two separate issues. Entitlements, I'm on the Budget Committee. Unfortunately, we haven't touched those in 30 years. And so now there's going to be some drastic moves needed. The Democrats are playing politics with some of this stuff. There's sequestration having to do with Medicare. We have all that. Never in the history of any of these big moves in a tax policy has this sequestration kicked in. They always forget to tell you that little, detail that matters. And I'm being a little sarcastic there. So there's no problem. Even if there was, it's about a $25 billion Medicare piece, and we have $320 billion to deal with that problem. So there's no way a senior is going to be affected by this. The Senate did do some good lifting on the Medicare provision. There was a separate deduction that was in play. They fixed that for seniors. And so that's good news. We're listening to Americans. We're trying to get the business side right, these pieces right. But just so your folks back home know, I was with my kindergartners a few weeks ago into school. They're in the class of 2030. They're entering kindergartners. They're in the class of college 2034. That's the year Medicare and Social Security are insolvent. So these aren't theoretical issues. You're going to get a guaranteed haircut in law. It's a $100 trillion unfunded problem on the backs of the kids. We know that. You're going to have a guaranteed fiscal crisis. It's not a financial crisis, but it's a guaranteed fiscal crisis. Go read the Medicare, Social Security Board of Trustees papers themselves. They'll tell you 2034 is the year they implode. That needs to be bipartisan, right? We put these things in place. They were actuarially sound when the average death age was 65. Now the average death age is 83. That's good news, but it's fiscally bankrupting us because we haven't made any modifications for 30 years.
I'm glad you brought up the idea of bipartisanship, Congressman, as well, because in addition to the work on tax reform, there's also work needed now. House leaders coming up with a 2-each patch-up job for spending to avert a government shutdown here. I know you've already made it clear that you're not satisfied at this stage. What information do you need to do in order to be satisfied about the two-part solution that they're coming up with here? And do Democrats need to be involved?
It'd be great to have everybody involved, right? But the one thing I ask from my Democrat colleagues is a plan on paper, right? So Obamacare's imploding. Charlottesville, city right next to my district, their rates are up to $39,000 for insurance for average family of 4, right? So we need a plan to fix it. And on the budget, we need a Democrat plan. They had a plan that got 107 votes. It was called the progressive budget. That's the plan that got the most votes, but it raised taxes by $10 trillion. It raised spending by $11 trillion, and I don't know if that's a realistic plan. So we have to work together, but we got to be aiming at those kids, right? The future of the kids, so that they're not underwater. And so I applaud working together, but you got to be aiming toward reducing spending. Larry Summers was just on, the former secretary. He said you can't run a government on this small shoestring. The small shoestring is gold-plated. It's $4 trillion a year up here. And I don't know anybody back home that wants to increase the size of the swamp. Everybody I know wants to send the money back down to state and local.
But when it comes down to it, preventing a government shutdown will require votes from the Democrats. So you'll need to work together somehow. On what specific Democrat points would you be willing to exceed in order to keep the government funded into next year?
Yeah, well, I'm willing to compromise. If they want to balance the budget, that's phenomenal. I haven't heard that for 10 years. And so let's see their plan to balance the budget. The deficit right now is $666 billion. That's a bad number for a few reasons, but we need a plan to reduce the 666 and get rid of it.
They would need to come up with specific proposals for you to agree to?
Well, that's how it usually works in law. It's got to be down on paper. We have it on paper, and then we pay all the price, right? Because every detail goes out to the whole world, and you got to live under that gun. Well, we do. And so they need to live under that same discipline and just propose a plan, right? Show us where would you do the give and take, and then we show you where we do the give and take, and then you compromise, and then hopefully you reduce the size of the deficit.